Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 27 of our reading of A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir by Lady Trent, and is a book by Marie Brennan. Now, we're going to go over the copyright information, which clearly says right here. A Natural History of Dragons, copyright 2013 by Bryn Noonschwander, all rights reserved. Interior illustrations by Todd Lockwood, maps by Rhys Davies, and designed by Greg Collins. Anyways, in the last chapter, last part, Lady Trent, otherwise known as Isabella Camhurst, and Dagmira, her lady in waiting or nursemaid, or I forget exactly what the title is, they went down into the cellar where Rossi was basically preserving dragon bones, and Rossi ended up stabbing Jacob in the gut, and so now the four of them, Jacob, Lady Camhurst, Ilgish, Dagmira, Lord Hilford, and Mr. Wilker, are all running for their lives. They're trying to escape because they found out that Rossi ended up killing Gretelkin. So, anyways, we are going to pick up where we left off. I don't remember where that was, but so, plus I think Mr. Wilker killed a boy, which, okay. And so we're going to read about that again. He realized it too, and yet he had gone. None of us wanted that atrocity on our heads. It made the nightmare of our flight even worse, though we could not ride at speed through the mountain night, even with the half moon to light our way, and although we had done what we could to hamper pursuit, we knew Kurzov's men would be following us. No, not even following. They knew where we would go, or so they would think. Dagmira and Ilgish consulted in quiet whispers, too rapidly to follow, and then proposed that we go where Kurzov would not expect, to the ruins. There was the huntsman's hut where Astoria, Lord Hilford, and I had spent the night. After our visit, or so we could attempt shelter in the ruins themselves. Ilgish volunteered to slip into the village on his own to gather up what he could of our more valuable possessions. Then I suppose we would go south, back to Chiavora, back to Skirland, leaving behind our notes and equipment and Lord Hilford's beloved armchair, and the people of Drustanev. It would mean breaking my vow. Dagmira and her brother could spread word of my theory, explaining to their neighbors why the dragons were attacking humans. But what good would it do? What good would it do them? They had no capacity to stop Kurzov and Rossi, no recourse to any higher authority, nor did we, not from where we stood. We could perhaps write to the Tsar once we had returned home, but it was a poor excuse for aid, and as little as that would do for their village, it would do even less for Dagmira and Ilgish, unless I could persuade them to go with us. Surely Rossi, if he survived, would remember the peasant who broke a jar over his head. They would not be safe anymore. All of that was a distant hypothetical, though soon lost behind the immediate necessity of our flight. The world narrowed to the simplest, most primitive of tasks: find water, find food, what little could be got while making forward progress, covering our tracks, keeping watch for dragons, staying in the saddle, or put one foot in front of the other when the terrain made riding all but impossible. Pray for Jacob. Mr. Wilker was the closest thing among us to a doctor, and he could do nothing except bind the wound. It would have been dreadful enough were Jacob lying in a bed. 3 days of grueling cross-country flight made his condition dire. All the blood leaching from his lips and his eyes acquired a staring blank quality as every ounce of effort he could spare went into clinging to his saddle and to life. I writhed with helplessness, my mind racing in a futile exhausted circles, trying and failing to find some way to help him. If I had entertained the slightest shred of hope that Kurzov would take pity on us, I would have sent the others onward and waited with my husband for our pursuers to come, but I did not. And so the only thing to do was to press on, praying that we would make it to the ruins and that rest there might restore my husband's strength. My prayer was doomed to failure, and I knew it. We struggled at last up the back slope of the ruins, with the shattered wall rising before us. There, with shelter in sight, Jacob slid bonelessly from his saddle and crashed into the ground. I cried out even before his sleeves had slipped from my grasp. Jerking my mount to a halt, I lurched down without grace and fell to my knees at my husband's side. So sure was I that Jacob had died, I could not even speak his name. But the touch of my hand on his cheek roused him. For one instant I felt hope. He was not dead, and we had reached the ruins, and surely all would be well. The delusion, however, could not survive for long. He would not move from this place. Jacob knew it, and so did I. Let's see, 309. 310. I caught up one of his hands, clutching it in my own. He responded with the merest twitch of his cold fingers. The only words I could find were pitifully inadequate. I'm so sorry. His white lips shaped the word no. Jacob closed his eyes, then opened them again, and mustered enough strength to speak. In a bloodless whisper, that went no further than my ear. No regrets. Be strong, Isabella. Stop them. I had spared enough energy during our flight, to tell the others that what Kurzov and Rossi were doing to the dragons, what I had found in the charred house of a cellar, of the charnel house. Sorry, what I had found in that charnel house of a cellar. But how could I stop them? All I could do was flee. The others had dismounted, forming a silent ring around me. The sun baked the silent ruins, a gentle blessing of warmth. I bent and kissed my husband's lips, pressing my mouth into his until I felt the faintest trace of pressure in return, tears slipping down my face to wet his. When I drew back at last, Jacob's eyes had closed for the last time, and a moment later, his breath stopped. You will think me inhumane for saying this, but even in the face of the worst grief I had ever experienced, grief piled atop mortal exhaustion and shock, my mind would not grant me the mercy of ceasing to work. It persisted in ticking along like a soulless collection of gears. And so when, after how long I do not know, I lifted my head to regard the others, the words that came from my mouth were nothing to do with my dead husband. Stretching before me on the ground, I said, I'm going to search the cave. I lay not 20 feet from where I had knelt, covered once more by branches. I nodded towards it and saw the others realize what I meant. In a tone half bewilderment, half groan, Mr. Wilker said, The smugglers, Mrs. Camhurst, with all due respect, do they truly matter? Yes, I said sharply. They are part of this, Mr. Wilker, part of the same conspiracy that had just killed my husband. Rossi said as much. I do not think it is opium they are smuggling. It is something else, and I'm determined to find out what. Jacob told me to stop them, and I intend to honor his last words. The entire picture had almost come together in my head. Only a few pieces were missing. Kurzov was an ambitious man, cultivating connections to the south, seeking to make a fortune for himself with Rossi's work on the dragon bones. He feared our research on account of that, but Gretelkin did not die because of the dragons. He died because of the smugglers, and Kurzov already had a fortune, at least a small one, with which to buy Rossi's chemical laboratory, not to mention rich clothing and spices for himself. But he had come to it recently, or the rest of his surroundings would be better. The keystone that would hold it all together lay here. I was sure of it. Mr. Wilker accompanied me because we had no rope, and he could lift himself from the cave where I could not. He could have gone alone, but I was determined to see with my own eyes. We struck a light on a fallen pine branch, which would do for a short-lived torch, and Mr. Wilker lowered me down, following a moment later. The crates I had seen before were gone. It was possible the smugglers had emptied the entire place out the day I'd come here with Dagmira, leaving no evidence behind, but the only way to make certain was to look. Torch raised against the darkness, I went farther into the cave. The way was cramped in places, but not enough to force us to crawl, and it did not go nearly as far back as I had feared. No more than 200 feet, I judged. At that point, the cave ended in a wall of solid earth and stone. Mr. Wilker brushed his hair from his face with one filthy hand and sighed. I'm sorry, Mr. Camhurst. Whatever they were storing here is gone. My gaze swept over the dirt, trying in a most unscientific fashion to deny its blank uselessness. There must be something. I would not allow there to be nothing, assuming what they did here was store, I murmured, going forward another few steps. The signs were there in the uneven shape of the earthen wall. The spots that might have been sharp gouges before the edges crumbled into soft slopes. Someone had been digging here, and not many days ago. I dropped to my knees, jamming the narrow end of the torch into the ground, and began to scrabble at the dirt. The rigors of rock climbing and cave exploration had already roughened my hands beyond what befitted a lady. Now I sacrificed the last bit of delicacy, tearing my nails as I clawed lumps of earth and stone away, and Mr. Wilker reached out to stop me. My persistence was rewarded. It glimmered even before I wiped it clean on my sleeve and held it up to the light. A fragrant of firestone, large enough that the one I had found, larger even than the one I had found in the grass above. It isn't a cache, I whispered. It's a mine. Kurzov has found a source of firestone. Mr. Wilker took the stone from me, lips pursed in a soundless whistle. His nitty accent came through strongly as he said, "If Bolskovo laws are anything like Skurlin's, by all rights this belongs to the Tsar." For such a glorious find, Kurzov might well receive a reward from his master, but how much more wealth could be gained by smuggling the stones across the border and selling them in Chiavora? He would have to do it slowly. A sudden glut of firestones would be noticed even if they were sold in secret, but it would not take many at all to fund Rossi's efforts and pay for some new luxuries in the bargain. Given enough time, the stones and the innovation of dragon bone, lightweight, all but indestructible, better even than steel, could make Kurzov one of the wealthiest men in the world. You know more of the politics and law than I do, I said, my voice tight. What might the Tsar do if he discovered his vassal was stealing from him in this fashion? It was a rhetorical question. We could both guess perfectly well. Mr. Wilker nodded. It would be enough to bring him down, yes. Let's go tell the others. The discovery put new life into our limbs, hurrying us back toward the ragged spill of light that was the cave's entrance. But Mr. Wilker, without warning, dragged me to a halt, one hand going over my lip to muffle my startled question. A rope dangled down from above. We had brought nothing of the sort with us from the Boyer's lodge. With his mouth by my ear, Mr. Wilker whispered, "You didn't see another way out of here, did you?" I shook my head. Hand tightened on the dying torch. The passage might continue beyond the dirt wall. My guess was that the ground above had collapsed at some point in the distant past. At this whole, as this whole place lay very near the surface, but that was of no use to us. The only exit was the opening into the arms of whoever waited above. It was a mark of our dire situation that I found myself hoping it was the Stolleran smugglers. Mr. Wilker drew in a deep breath and squared his shoulders. "Stay hidden," he murmured near soundlessly, and snuff out the light. "I will go. With any luck, they'll think I came down alone." It was the gentlemanly thing to do. It was also the only thing that might win us the slightest advantage. If only I could think how to use it. Iljish had left us already, diverging towards Drustanev in hopes of snatching up our money. Only Lord Hilford and Dagmira waited above. What use I could be separate from them, I did not know, but it was worth a try. My jaw tight, I nodded to Mr. Wilker and doused the torch in the dirt. The drop was not a large one. With jumping, he could have caught a hold of the edge and dragged himself out. With the rope's aid, he was gone from my sight in mere seconds. From above, I heard muffled voices. Then a voice speaking Bolskoy accented Chiavorin that I recognized all too well. "We know you are down there. Come out now." I kicked myself inwardly, and I remembered the horses. If Kurzov had snared my companions, as I had to assume he had, then he would have seen the extra riderless mount. Even the best liar would have been hard-pressed to make him believe I had lain down somewhere for a nap or fallen over a cliff or any such thing. Gritting my teeth, I went forward and took a hold of the rope. They dragged me up without ceremony and dumped me to the ground, where I climbed to my feet. I saw it was quite as bad as I had feared. Kurzov had brought with him half a dozen men, the sort of odds that may have been entirely manageable in a drunk man's boast, but which are rather more difficult in real life, especially when the half dozen have guns and 2 gentlemen and 2 women those guns are pointed at do not. In addition, there was Kurzov himself, and with him Gaetano Rossi. When the man had lain helpless at my feet, I had felt compunction about the desire to see him dead. Now that he stood before me and my husband was the one lifeless on the ground, I wished very foul, poisonous rage that I had cut his throat while I could. It was a scant satisfaction to notice the bruising from Dagmira's jar and the discoloration with the chemicals had spilled over his skin. Our captors looked tired. They must have ridden hard to catch us, but nothing like so exhausted as we were. Kurzov mostly looked angry. "When I invited you to my lodge, I was considering whether it might suffice to order you out of my lands," he said. "Had you not been so determined to pry, it might have done if you had been content to remain ignorant." "We would have been suspicious," I said, too foolishly to keep my mouth shut. That's why you tried the ridiculous charade with Astoria." The Boyer shrugged. "Yes, but what could you do? Complain to the Tsar? He would not care. Not if all you had were suspicions. But now we had proof, or rather enough specifics to give the Tsar reason to investigate. Theft, smuggling, murder, even if no one cared that the Boyer's scheme was causing the dragons to attack people, the rest would be enough to cause him trouble. I retained enough sense not to point that out, if only barely. The most likely case was that he had followed. Oh, the most likely. The most likely case was that he had followed with the intention of killing us, but if not, there was no sense in encouraging him. Lord Hilford said, "You forget, sir, that I am a Skirling peer. You and your men there have murdered a Skirling gentleman." The way he pronounced the word sir, it might have been the vilest insult he knew. Kurzov seemed entirely unconcerned. With the feuds between Bolskovo and Skirland, that only gives the Tsar more reason to ignore you. Perhaps, Lord Hilford said, drawing himself up, but it gives others more reason to pay attention. If anything should happen to me or my companions, it would go very hard for you. Rossi laughed outright, so a harsh, ugly sound. What if you met with an accident? Chasing around the mountains, trying to pet the dragons. There have been so many attacks lately, after all. Who could be surprised if it ended badly? As covers for murder went, that one was unfortunately plausible. And even if the villagers or our families back home could raise suspicion regarding our deaths, it would not do as much good. I had little hope that it would be any use, but I had to try. Didn't your tame chemist there tell you, Iosif Abramovich, all these attacks you're causing them yourself? The more you pursue this course, the worse it will get. As I feared, Kurzov only shrugged again. Dead dragons will attack no one, and we can protect ourselves better than the peasants can. He could not keep talking forever. Sooner or later, and likely sooner, he would decide to end at least one of his problems by ending us. I glanced toward Mr. Wilker, hoping he might see some way of making use of our Firestone discovery to persuade Kurzov to spare us. But he seemed entirely distracted, squinting into the late afternoon sun. Late afternoon. I squinted too, wrinkling up my face so that our captors might think me about to cry. With my lashes filtering the light, I could make out what Mr. Wilkers had seen, a large shape in the sky, winging its way home for the night, but too distant to be of any threat, unless we happen to provoke it. There are proverbs about frying pans and fires that I might have quoted to myself, but I prefer to adapt a different one to my purposes. Better the devil that would attack everyone impartially than the devil specifically looking to kill you, or kill us, rather. At the very least, it would create chaos, and we would be able to take advantage of that. Or rather, the others might. What I had in mind to do might leave me in no state to take advantage of anything at all. I could not let myself think about it. If I did, my nerves might fail me. I simply looked at Rossi and said the first offensive thing that came to my head. By the way, I burned your notebook. Then I hiked up my skirt and took off for the ruins. For the first few steps, I thought it would do no good. One of the soldiers would just chase me and drag me back with nothing gained. But then I heard Rossi in rage sputtering, which resolved at last into words, "Shoot her." Even when you are exhausted beyond any previous experience of the word, adrenaline has the marvelous ability to bring life to your limbs. I ducked and wove through the thin trees, praying desperately that I might make it to the wall where I had found my firestone. The first shot came close enough that splinters rained across my face. It was soon followed by more, and then I flung myself to the ground behind the stone, gasping for air. How many shots were left? 8? 10? Would they carry clearly enough in the mountain air to draw the rock worm's attention to this place? I had certainly occasioned I had certainly occasioned a great deal of shouting. I I wanted very badly to look whether the others were all right, but my respite lasted only a few seconds when I scrambled once more to my feet and looking for a hiding spot, knowing someone would be after me if they weren't already. Gunfire broke out again, this time more sporadic. My heart was torn. Every shot I hoped increased the odds that the dragon would take offense, but it also meant my companions were in danger. Also, I was cursing the impulse that had made me run. It seemed such a hopeless gamble, and yet what better chance did we have? Run and be shot, or stay and do the same? I plunged through the concealed screen of brush and found myself mere feet from a terrified and very dirty Astoria, more precisely from the barrel of his rifle. But I had passed through fear to a region on the far side where I could without hesitation do things that would have seemed unthinkable risks in the light of saner contemplation. I seized the gun's muzzle and wrenched it aside, and neither my conviction that he would not shoot me was powerful enough to convince him to, or Astoria was paralyzed with his own fear, for he did not resist. The boyer is going to kill us, I snarled, and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. You have already killed my husband. You helped create this disaster. You will darn well do something to fix it. Get out there and help. Upon that last word, I hurled him bodily towards the fight. I honestly cannot tell you whether I remembered to speak in Vestrani or not. It may be that my tone sufficed all on its own. Astoria stumbled through the brush, and then I sallied after him, driven by grief and rage past the bounds of rationality into a soaring state wherein I had lost the capacity for fear. My husband lay dead on the ground. I must do something more than run. Oh, we are way over time here. Anyways, we have been reading from A Natural History of Dragons, a memoir of Lady Trent, a book by Marie Brennan. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information, or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.